I've gotten a lot of requests recently to demonstrate how to create a hamburger menu, also known as a navigation drawer for a WPF application. So in this UI component workshop, we're going to be creating a custom hamburger menu, and we're also going to show off how to animate the opening and closing of that menu as well. So let me start off by showing off the application I prepared for this demo. So we just have a single page, and when I click this little hamburger icon, what I wanted to do is slide a menu out from the left, and that would just have a bunch of options for me to click. And this is actually based off of the Angular docs. Let me bring that up just to give an example. So right here, got the same little hamburger icon, and you just click it to open and close the menu. So I want something similar to this. I'm even going to be using the same exact colors. So let's start off the same way we start off most of these UI workshops, by creating a new project to hold our control. And that's just in case I ever want to publish these as a NuGet package, but this is going to be a WPF custom control, a library, and this is going to be called the hamburger menu control. I apologize if you refer to these as navigation drawers, but I'm just so used to calling them hamburger menus. So we're going to roll with that, and let's delete this gigantic comment. Instead of calling this custom control 1, we're going to call it hamburger menu, and this is going to be our control. And this control has a default style defined in the themes generic.xaml. The location of this file does matter, and right now we're still using custom control 1, but it has to be hamburger menu, and this default style is going to define the template, which is basically how our hamburger menu is going to look. But before we get into this custom control template, let's first head back into our hamburger menu and think about what kind of properties the hamburger menu is going to have. Well, our hamburger menu can be opened or closed, so we're going to have a dependency property for isOpen, which is going to be a boolean. The owner class is the hamburger menu, and by default we'll go with false. That's tough. Maybe it should be true, but we're going to leave isOpen as false by default. So we'll have a hamburger menu that can open and close, but what are we going to have inside the hamburger menu? We're going to have some content. So let's set up another property for content, and this can actually just be an object, so it can be anything passed as the content. And our class is the hamburger menu, and by default this can just be null. So that's really all the properties I can think of at the moment. So let's head into our generic.xaml and set up this control template. So we're just going to open up this border and have a content control, and the content for this content control is going to template bind to our content on our hamburger menu. So that's just this dependency property right here. And all that means is whatever content we pass into our hamburger menu is going to be displayed inside of our control template, which is what we want. So that takes care of the content, but what about whether or not the hamburger menu is open or not? Well, what we can do is set up a binding to visibility, a template binding that is, to isOpen, but isOpen is a true false boolean, and we need to convert this to a visibility, and we can just use the built-in boolean to visibility converter. So we can put that in our control template resources, a boolean to visibility converter, and now convert this boolean of isOpen to either visible or collapsed. So let's just give this a key boolean to visibility converter and set that as the converter for our controls visibility. So pass in the key as a static resource, and that should be everything we need to toggle whether or not the hamburger menu is visible or not. So I think we're ready to test this out. We haven't set up any animation yet. We're going to cover that in just a second, but let's head into our window. So this is what's currently being displayed in my application. Here's the little hamburger icon that we click to toggle whether or not we want the hamburger menu to display or not. So we're going to have to bind to this, and then here's our application's title. So this is all part of the header, and then we have the page underneath that, and to the left of our page we want our hamburger menu. So we will reference that hamburger menu, and before we can do that, we're gonna have to reference our hamburger menu control project. So let's go ahead and check that, and now we should be able to do a control dot and add the namespace that has that control, and we can just call this custom, and this will go in grid column 0. And as I mentioned, I want to bind our isOpen property on the hamburger menu to whether or not the hamburger icon has been clicked or not. So our hamburger icon is just a checkbox, so we can bind to whether or not that checkbox is checked or not. So we're going to bind to is checked, and I gave that checkbox a name so we can reference that, the CB toggle menu. And then we're also going to need some content on our hamburger menu, so that is the custom content dependency property that we created. And for now, we'll just throw in a text block and just say hello world. Why not? So right now we're closed. Let's click the hamburger icon, and there we go. So we did have our menu slide out, but it doesn't really feel like a menu. We need some kind of visual distinction here, so let's give it a background. So the background, I'm actually going to grab this off of the Angular website. So let's just try and match Angular as much as possible. So this background on this menu is F2, F2, F2 hex. So let's set that. All right, I kind of see it. We should also give this some padding. So we'll just throw like 20 in here. That looks better. Increase that font size. Looks like we also have a border over here, so let's try and grab that color. So it looks like that's DB, DB, DB in hex. So that's going to be our border brush, and then our border thickness will be just 1 pixel to the right. So we're going to put 1 for this third value, and this is looking pretty good. I think the last thing we want to do is make this say something like introduction instead of hello world. And there we go. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So now we're ready for the fun part. Let's go ahead and make the opening and closing of the hamburger menu animated. So for this, we're not going to be able to just bind to isOpen for the visibility, because all visibility does is either show or hide the hamburger menu. And instead, we want the opening and closing to be animated by animating the width from 0 to whatever size for opening, and then whatever size to 0 for closing. So we're not going to have this template binding, and we're going to set up an animation on the width. So in other workshops, such as the hold submit button control, to actually bring that up, I did all the animations in storyboards, and this is a pretty typical way to do animations in WPF. But we ran into tons of issues with having to set up bindings inside of our animations, and we kind of had to do some hacky stuff, and as a result, it's not really the prettiest solution, but it does indeed get the job done, but I still don't like it. So for the hamburger menu, we're actually going to be doing the animations inside of our code for our control, and it's going to be so much easier, and honestly, we kind of have to do it inside the code based on what we're going to do. So back to implementing this, what are we animating? We're animating the width, and that animation is going to occur whenever we change whether or not the hamburger menu is opened or closed. So that being said, we're going to set up a property changed callback on this isOpen dependency property, so we can generate one of those. So we'll call this on isOpen property changed, generate that. We'll move that down here. And now for this callback, we're first going to check if this dependency object is indeed a hamburger menu, which it should be, but we'll do a quick little check. So if it is a hamburger menu, throw that into a variable. And then with that hamburger menu, we'll call a method. We'll call this on, we'll just call it on isOpen property changed again. Why not? Keep it simple. And then we'll generate that. So this isOpen property changed is actually an instance method. So we can access all kinds of things like the width of the control, whether or not it is open. So this is where all the power is going to go. So the isOpen property changed, let's check if isOpen is true. So if it is, then we actually want to do the opening animation. So we'll encapsulate all of that into a function as well. We'll call this open menu, how about open menu animated. So this is going to do all the animation for opening, and we'll generate that. But then if we're now closed, then we'll want to do close menu animated and generate that as well. So we're doing well so far, and now for the actual animation. And this is so much easier than storyboards and control templates. So first, we're going to define the animation we want to do. So in this case, animating width. Width is a double, so we're going to use a double animation. Import that, and this is the opening animation. And we'll instantiate this, and we get a few constructors here. So we can pass in the to value, the duration, the from value as well. But I think what we want is this to value. So we'll just hard code something for now, but in a little bit, we're going to show off how we can calculate this to value to actually fit the size that we need for our opened hamburger menu. And then for the duration, I could just hard code that, but let's get that passed in as a dependency property so we can configure it. That's always fun. So another prop DP, we'll call this the open close duration property. So we'll also use this for closing. It'll be of type duration on the hamburger menu. And by default, I think duration automatic is pretty good. That might be too slow or fast, but we'll see. But anyways, now that we have this dependency property, we can use that for our duration for the animation. And now we want to actually do the animation. So UI element, which we inherit from somewhere up the chain, that has a begin animation function. And we can simply pass in the dependency property we want to animate, and that is the width property. And then we just pass in our animation. And that is so much easier. We didn't have to deal with any kind of weird bindings. And now for the close animation, let's change this. call this the closing animation. And this time the to value is going to be 0. So if the width is 0, it's not going to be visible. And I also want to go over why I'm using this to value and duration constructor and not the one that wants a from value. And that's because I want the from value to be whatever width we're currently at. So if I set the from value to something like 100, and let's say that I close while I'm in the middle of opening, then I might only be halfway through opening and the current width would be 50. But if we start this close animation, then it's going to automatically snap the width to 100 and then start closing. And that's not what we want. We want the animation to start from 50, what we were currently at when we were opening. So we're not going to care about the from value. It's just going to be whatever width we're currently at when the animation starts. And this is actually everything I think we need. So let's go ahead and test this out. And here we go. Our hamburger menu is visible. Let's click this and we do get an exception. So we cannot animate the width property on our hamburger menu. And why is that? Because our width is nan, so not a number, when we start the animation. And that is true because we don't specify a width anywhere on this hamburger menu. So by default, it's auto, which is not a number. And honestly, we don't really want it to be not a number anyways, because by default, our hamburger menu is closed. So is open is false. So we'd really want the width to be 0. So in fact, what I'm going to do inside of my constructor, so right when we initialize this, is set the width to 0. And now we should be good. So we're closed by default. And now we open, and there we go. That was a pretty slow animation. Let's go ahead and speed that up. So set that duration property, the open close duration, maybe 0.1 seconds. That's faster, I think. That's like really fast. A little bit slower. We'll go with like 0.25. That's pretty solid. But anyways, as we can see, we are hard coding our width for this animation to 100, and that is not big enough for the content inside of the hamburger menu. So we could just like increase this to like 300, and then that would probably fit our content. But then what if our content got bigger than that? We'd have to change this again. So really what I'd want is this number that we pass into the animation to just be the size that we actually need for our content. So we're gonna have to calculate what width our content actually needs. And we can use our content dependency property to do that. But we can't do it the way that we have it now because it's just an object. If we want to get the width that this content needs, it's actually going to have to be a framework element, and then we can access some more properties that'll tell us about the width that it wants. So let's change all that. And this will all still work because a text block is indeed a framework element, as most WPF controls are. So now content is a framework element, so now we can use that down here to get the width that's going to fit our content. And that's going to be the content's desired size width. It's that simple. And let's put that into a variable. So the content width, and just pass that in as our width. So this should all work, right? Let's try it out. And let's put a breakpoint here to see what the desired width is. And open that. And the desired width is 0. So that is not what we want. And we wouldn't expect that because we know we have content in there. So why is the desired width 0? Well, that is because our hamburger menu's width is 0. So the content thinks it needs to be 0. But we know the content can do better than that. We know that content wants to just spread its wings like a butterfly and be its maximum width. So we're going to tell it, you know what? You can be your maximum width. And to do that, we're going to use the measure function and just tell this content that it can be as big as it wants. So we'll pass in a size, and we'll just pass in the max width and the max height for the hamburger menu. So okay, maybe it can't be as big as it wants, but it can be as big as the hamburger menu allows it to be. And if we don't specify these values on the hamburger menu, it's just going to be positive infinity. So by default, the content can be as big as it wants. And this might seem like some kind of hack, but this is actually what WPF uses under the hood to measure elements and lay them out on the screen. We're just doing it manually, and let's see it in action. So let's open, and now the content width is 127 pixels. That sounds about right. And we're passing that in. So let's see this. And there we go. We did open. I won't actually see it without a breakpoint. Let's see it. And open. There we go. Looks pretty dang awesome. And now let's make this text block gigantically long. And try this again. And there we go. We got the full width. So the nice thing about our hamburger menu is that it's extremely flexible. So for this content, we can put in anything we want. It doesn't have to be, for example, hamburger menu items or anything. It could be an image, it could be like a paragraph of text, it can be anything. But for this demo, I think I actually do want some hamburger menu items inside of here. So I am going to create a new control, the hamburger menu item, and I think I actually want to inherit from radio button, because a hamburger menu item can be selected, similar to a radio button, and then we could group multiple hamburger menu items into a single radio button group, so that only one of these hamburger menu items could be selected at once. So that could be useful, and let's start off by overriding the default style. So we're going to take this static constructor that we have in hamburger menu and just copy it into hamburger menu item and update these names, import the metadata, and now we can define a custom default style for the hamburger menu item, and that's going to go in generic.xaml. So I'm just going to copy the hamburger menu style, update this for the hamburger menu item. I suppose we don't need this converter anymore. Same with the hamburger menu, don't need it there either. And this is actually all I want to do for the hamburger menu item. And this might seem like we did nothing, but the default control template for a radio button is obviously going to have the actual radio button dot that we select, and we don't really want that. That would look kind of ugly if we had the actual radio button off to the side here and we had to click that. So now back in our main window, let's set up our content. We're going to put all these hamburger menu items into a stack panel, and let's just toss some margin on here. We'll do 10 top and bottom and get rid of this old text block, because now we are using the mighty hamburger menu item, and we can set some content inside of here. So we'll just throw another text block in there. I guess bring back the introduction text. And let's get a few of these. I guess we'll do like 4, maybe 5. And we'll put some of these names in here. So like getting started, developer guides, tutorials, and reference. All right, that's a good start, but we need some padding definitely. And we need our font size back. So I could apply that to all of these hamburger menu items, but instead we'll just create a style in our hamburger menu resources that's automatically going to get applied to all of these items. So we'll define a style targeting the hamburger menu item, and we'll set the padding, maybe 20 on left and right, and then 10 top bottom. And we want the font size to be 16. I think that's what we were using before. Let me just restart. Let's see how this looks. And I'm not seeing the padding, so why is that? You know what, I think, oh, it's because our border does not template bind to padding. So I got to remember all of these template bindings. This wasn't actually added automatically for us, because this original border was just generated automatically in our generic.xaml, and we just used it and then eventually copied it down here. So I blame the WPF template for that, but that should fix it. Okay, that's good. And now we have to open and close again because our content changed. There we go, that's much better. And now let's get some of this hover action animation going in here. So it looks like by default we have a slightly different font color, and I believe that is, let's see, what is that? Looks like 444 in hex. So we'll set that as the foreground color. This is just turned into recreating the Angular hamburger menu. Okay, that looks good. So looks like the font color, that's not really an animation. I think that's just an immediate change. So that's going to be pretty easy to implement. And for that, we can set some triggers in here, and we're going to set a trigger for if isMouseOver is true. Then we'll set the foreground color to that blue stuff. And what is that blue stuff? So 1669BB, copy that. And looks like that's also the color whenever the hamburger menu item is selected. So we can also have a trigger for is, it's going to say is selected, but it looks like it is checked, because we inherit from radio button. And now look at that, that looks good. And okay, when we hover over it, it changes as well. So we're getting there. Now we just need the background, and those can be event triggers. And the event we want to use is mouse enters. So whenever our mouse enters the bounds of the hamburger menu item, then we want to start an animation. And we are going to use storyboards for this. This is pretty straightforward, so no worries. And we'll just throw a storyboard in here, and we're animating the background color. So this is going to be a color animation, and the duration, I guess we'll just do like 0.1 second. Seems pretty fast. And then the color we're animating to is the good old DB. And then the property we're animating, so we access that with storyboard target property. This one's a little bit weird. So it is the background, but background is a brush, and we're using a color animation. So we want to grab the brush that's set on our background and animate that brush's color. So to access that brush, we're going to have to do some casting. So we can surround this with parentheses and then grab the color on the background. And that is a solid color brush. And let's see if this actually works with live debugging. We might have to restart, but hover over and we actually crash and we do not point to a dependency object. And I think the reason for that is because by default, the background is not set. So we do have to give it a default value. And we can set that to transparent. And I think that should work. So let's hover. All right, there we go. So now we just need to remove that background color whenever we leave. So for that, we just copy the event trigger, change it to mouse leave, and we're just going to animate back to transparent. And all right, I think this time we do have to restart. Let's try this again. Oh, this is going to be good. There we go. Looks pretty awesome. And as we can see on the Angular page, we do have these drop downs, and I'm not going to go into that because I'm going to save drop downs for another UI component workshop. So saving that for now. I don't want this video to go on for too long, which I think it already has, but that is where we're going to wrap up. So we have our hamburger menu. We started off without animation, and that was pretty simple, but to add animation, not too bad considering we used the code to animate. And even if we didn't want the animation, we could just set the open close duration to 0. So look at that. All right, no more animation, but I like the animation. That's fun. And then we can pass in any kind of content to our hamburger menu. In this case, we have these custom hamburger menu items, which just inherit from radio button. And we have some styling everywhere to give it the Angular hamburger menu look and feel. And real quick, I noticed something dangerous. So what if the content was null? So in that case, let's go into our main window and just comment out all of the content. Well, then we get a null reference exception. That's not what we want. So what we should do is let's just move all of this with calculation into a function. So we'll call this get desired content with, and we can just say if the content is null, then return some kind of default value, maybe 100. Or how about a fallback with? And that can be a dependency property that the client can set. So the fallback, how about the fallback open with? And that's a double. The owner class is the hamburger menu, and the default value, we'll just make it 100. Whoops, this is supposed to be fallback open with. Let's make sure I change all that, and then use that as the fallback value. And we'll set that, we'll say maybe 300, so kind of big. And try this out, so even though the content is null, we still open successfully. So that is where we're going to wrap up. Hamburger menus, definitely a beautiful UI component to add to your own application. So maybe you could use this hamburger menu as the jelly to the peanut butter of my navigation series. If you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave them below in the comment section. If you're enjoying the channel or enjoyed the video, consider becoming a member. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.